Every great Hollywood story carries shadows underneath the spotlight, and few shadows run as deep or linger as long as the one cast over Natalie Wood. She was one of the most gifted actresses of her generation, a child star who grew into an Oscar-nominated icon and held audiences for 4 decades. Then, on a cold November night in 1981, she vanished from the deck of a yacht anchored off California's Catalina Island. Her body was found the next morning. 44 years later the case is still officially unresolved, and the 2 daughters she left behind continue to live inside that extraordinary shadow. But how does a life that shone so brightly end in such darkness? Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20, 1938, in San Francisco, she was the daughter of Russian immigrants who had fled the upheaval of civil war and rebuilt their lives in California. Her mother Maria poured every unfulfilled dream of stardom into her second child. From the moment little Natasha could walk, Maria took her to movie houses, studied the faces of child performers on screen, and engineered chances for her daughter to be noticed. The plan worked faster than anyone expected. At 4 she was already in small film roles. By 7 she caught the eye of director Irving Pichel, who cast her opposite Claudette Colbert and Orson Welles in Tomorrow is Forever. The family moved to Los Angeles. Studio executives at RKO gave her the name Wood after director Sam Wood. 1 year later, at just 8 years old, she appeared in Miracle on 34th Street as the doubting little girl at the heart of one of the most beloved Christmas films ever made. Audiences were already under her spell. The jump from child star to serious actress is one of Hollywood's most dangerous crossings, and many careers collapse on the way. Natalie Wood made it with instinct and grace. By 1955 she stood opposite James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause and earned her first Academy Award nomination. She was no longer the precocious child. She was a dramatic force who could carry the full weight of a scene beside the most electric presence of her generation. What came next defined a career of real range. In 1961 she starred in Splendor in the Grass under Elia Kazan and collected a second Oscar nomination. That same year she anchored West Side Story, the landmark musical that became one of the decade's defining films. A third nomination arrived for Love with a Proper Stranger in 1963, making her the youngest actress at the time to earn 3 nods before age 25. 3 Golden Globes followed. Her name on a marquee was one of the surest guarantees of audience interest in an era of true movie stardom. Yet her personal life never ran as smoothly as the credits. She married Robert Wagner in 1957 in a romance that looked like pure Golden Age glamour. The marriage ended in 1962. In 1969 she married British producer Richard Gregson. Their daughter Natasha was born the next year. That marriage also ended. Then, in a twist that felt written for the screen, Natalie and Robert Wagner remarried in 1972. Their second daughter, Courtney Brooke Wagner, arrived in 1974. For a while the family seemed steady, 2 daughters, a Hollywood home, a mother quietly preparing for her next project. Then Thanksgiving weekend 1981 arrived, and everything changed in a single night. What really happened on that yacht has never been settled. Natalie, Robert Wagner, their yacht captain Dennis Davern, and her Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken boarded the family boat, Splendor, and headed to Catalina Island. The late hours of November 28 and the early minutes of November 29 have never been fully explained. On the morning of the 29th, Natalie Wood's body was found floating in the Pacific, dressed in a red down jacket, a flannel nightgown, and wool socks. She was 43. The small inflatable dinghy had washed up on nearby rocks. Natalie, who was famously terrified of dark water and could not swim, was gone. A 2-week investigation followed. Chief Medical Examiner Thomas Noguchi ruled the death an accidental drowning and said the bruises on her body were consistent with a fall. For nearly 30 years that ruling held. But the story would not stay quiet. What made investigators reopen the file after 3 decades? Yacht captain Dennis Davern had originally backed Wagner's account. Over time his story shifted. By 2011 he joined more than 700 people signing a petition that pointed out serious flaws in the original investigation and demanded a fresh look. In a television interview he admitted he had not been fully truthful and described a heated argument between Natalie and Wagner the night she disappeared. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department decided the new information was strong enough to reopen the case. In 2012 the coroner amended the death certificate. The cause changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. The manner of death became undetermined. A supplemental autopsy report highlighted bruises on her forearm, wrist, knee, and face that were not necessarily consistent with a simple fall. The original investigation, officials admitted, had never fully accounted for the physical evidence on her body. Then came the moment that grabbed public attention. In a 2018 CBS News interview, Lieutenant John Corina named Robert Wagner a person of interest. As we've investigated the case over the last 6 years, I think he's more of a person of interest now, Corina said. We know now that he was the last person to be with Natalie before she disappeared. Detective Ralph Hernandez added that the fresh bruising made her appear the victim of an assault. Wagner had refused to speak with investigators since the reopening, and his version of events did not match other witnesses. No charges were ever filed. Wagner has always denied any wrongdoing. In his 2009 memoir he called the night a tragic accident, suggesting Natalie slipped while trying to secure the dinghy. Christopher Walken cooperated and was never named a person of interest. New witnesses reported hearing a woman screaming from the direction of the yacht that night. By 2022 the department said it had exhausted available leads and moved the matter to cold case status, still technically open if credible new information appears. Wagner was no longer called a person of interest. The case sits in that uneasy space between suspicion and certainty. What cannot be argued is the human cost: 2 young girls left without their mother. How did those daughters build lives from that sudden ruin? Natasha Gregson Wagner was 11 the night her mother vanished. She has called the loss the defining moment of her life, a wound so total that for years she could not examine the circumstances of the death. The grief was simply too large. She held on to fragments instead: the sound of her mother's laugh, the warmth of her presence, the feeling of being loved by someone larger than life. After Natalie died, her biological father Richard Gregson agreed that Natasha should stay in Wagner's household with her half-sisters. Wagner legally adopted her. She still calls him Daddy Wagner. She has spoken of him with steady warmth, describing him as her protector, her wisest counsel, and one of the great loves of her life. The blended family that rose from tragedy became, in her words, a genuine source of stability. Her own career followed her mother's path into acting. She left college in the early 90s and built more than 60 film and television credits: Lost Highway, Urban Legend, High Fidelity, The 4400, ER, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She carried her mother's name and her own identity through an industry that never let her forget whose daughter she was. In 2012 she and actor Barry Watson welcomed a daughter, Clover Clementine Watson, named in part after Natalie's film Inside Daisy Clover. They married in 2014. The family remains close to Robert Wagner and his wife Jill St. John. As recently as late 2025 Wagner posted holiday photos with Natasha and her family, writing of the joy they bring him. Natasha answered by calling him her soft landing. Clover, now 14, is Natalie Wood's only grandchild. In 2020 Natasha stepped forward more deliberately. She produced and appeared in the HBO documentary Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, which focused on the richness of the life rather than the mystery of the death. She also published the memoir More Than Love, offering private photographs and reflections on growing up as Natalie Wood's daughter. Speaking publicly became a form of healing. When Wagner was named a person of interest in 2018, Natasha called the claim outrageous and said she knew he was incapable of hurting her mother. For her, the investigative questions and the man who raised her lived in separate worlds. She has also launched a fragrance line called Natalie, built around her mother's signature gardenia scent. I love the idea of bottling a memory, she has said. In that single sentence the depth of her devotion comes clear. Yet her younger sister chose a very different path. Courtney Wagner was only 7 when Natalie died. She has said she remembers little beyond sensory scraps, the sound of a laugh, a particular smell, the feel of her mother's hands. These are the impressions of a very young child, gathered before grief even had a name. She grew up in the same household with Natasha and stepsister Katie Wagner. The 3 girls became central to Wagner's ability to keep going in those first hard months. Shared grief became the foundation of lifelong loyalty. Unlike Natasha, Courtney stepped far back from the entertainment industry. Her most visible appearance came in that same 2020 HBO documentary, where she spoke quietly about growing up without her mother and carrying the loss into adulthood. Viewers saw someone thoughtful and measured, familiar with grief without being defined by it. Her personal life carried real difficulty. She struggled with substance addiction in earlier adult years. A 2012 incident made the battle public. Natasha spoke of her sister with deep affection, describing someone who lives in the truth and has found compassion and forgiveness for herself. Courtney later achieved lasting sobriety. She married Leif Lewis in 2007, their son Riley was born in 2006 and has been raised largely outside the public eye, a deliberate choice that mirrors Courtney's preference for quieter rooms. Every so often a photograph surfaces, and the reaction is always the same: how powerfully she resembles Natalie Wood. The features, the bearing, the quiet presence that once lit the screen all echo in a face that has chosen not to perform. Both daughters have stood firmly behind Robert Wagner through years of public scrutiny. Courtney told People magazine in 2020 that the family experienced a true collective tragedy and that moving forward depended entirely on having one another. The language was careful and loving, not a family that escaped trauma, but one that walked through it together and survived. As of 2026 she continues to live privately, connected to Hollywood through history rather than work. The 2 daughters of Natalie would tend their mother's legacy in different ways. One has stepped into the light to speak of it openly. The other tends it quietly from within. Both carry the same loss. Both chose love over bitterness. And in that choice they have honored a woman who was, by every account that truly matters, a mother first and a movie star second.